when the movie starts and we introduce Blade, we start off with two vampires running, and the camera work is moving along with them. And then they run past camera, and then the camera pushes forward, and then we see Blade appear from the end of this hallway. He comes out of the darkness, and a couple more vampires show up, and they have guns, and Blade draws his gun first and guns them down. And immediately you see amazing sparks pop out of the vampires, and they explode into fiery ash. And so right from this first shot, what's happening is visual storytelling, right? Vampires are scared of Blade. When Blade shoots them, they burst into horrific flames. So we have world building, we have the establishing of the rules of how vampires work in this world, and we're literally just getting right to it. And when the first two vampires we see reach the end of the hallway, it's a door to a fire escape. They go down the fire escape, and then Blade, we follow from behind, and he does this amazing leap where he flips anime style, and the camera is following him, rotates around him, all at seemingly real speed, and then he hits the ground in a perfect superhero landing. And then he pulls out his gun and fires the gun, and then we follow the bullet of the gun as it hits one of those vampires, and then we watch that vampire again explode into beautiful explosive ash. And the other vampire that is running away, Blade catches up to the other vampire, tortures him a little bit, and the vampire says, "We just found him. We just found him. He already turned, and then we captured him." And the very following scene, there's a knock on a door. We're seeing vampires doing blood cocaine or blood heroin. I'm not exactly sure what it is. And it's the vampire that Blade caught, and he says, "Let me in. My name is Rush. It's me." And as soon as they unlock the door, and when we see these vampires, we're not seeing Blade and that guy outside the door. We're just seeing the scene from the point of view of the vampires doing their blood drugs, and they're in some kind of factory. We don't know exactly where they are, but we know they're in some kind of industrial factory. So we're seeing the scene from their point of view until they unlock the door, and then there's gunfire. The first vampire who unlocked the door explodes into ash, and the door bursts open, blowing the ashy parts of that vampire into even more dust. And Blade rushes in and guns down the other vampires. And he's very quick, he's very efficient. We get a couple more action scenes with other vampires, but in every single kill, Blade is quick, he's efficient, and these things are important. And then when he's finally done with all of his vampire killing, he leaves the guy he tortured to be alive. "I'll deal with you later." And then where does he go? He goes into a very dark room with this giant man-sized vat of blood, and in that vat of blood is Chris Christopherson, Whistler. And we come to realize that everything Blade's been doing, he's been looking for Whistler. So let's walk this back a bit, okay? This is our opening introduction action sequence with Blade. And although, yes, it's visually very cool, but how is I describing the action? How is the action performed? The action is performed quickly, violently, efficiently. Blade does not care about these vampires, and he loves killing them with style. You know, I didn't even talk about the introduction of the boomerang blade that he slings around, and it comes back to him and cuts up other vampires. But that doesn't matter. The point of my description is that he kills them efficiently, quickly, and we're also visually establishing the rules of how vampires explode when struck with silver bullets. This is how this world works. But also, Blade as a character is killing these vampires as quickly and efficiently as possible, not just because that's who he is, but because he's trying to get to Whistler, that he has an objective. And as soon as he finds Whistler, that cold, steely exterior, it sheds just a bit, And his one line is, "Look what they've done to you." And now he slows down, and like us, he becomes the samurai version of himself there. He's found his master in a very bad place. He cuts these like tubes that they have plugged into him and catches him falling. And we get this little moment where Whistler, who's so out of it, he's been basically been sedated, and they have him in the blood. And they just have a little moment where Whistler's eyes open and he sees Blade, and Blade looks back at him. And although Blade, Wesley Snipes, has sunglasses on, his silence and his stillness really speaks volumes to the love and respect there is. And I know that sounds bizarre, but this is an action movie. This is the action genre. And typically action heroes, again, they speak through behavior. Again, right off the bat, the action communicates the intention or the emotion of the character. So Blade is killing vampires dispassionately. He gets Whistler. He's gentle and tender with Whistler, and that physical behavior is an action, right? It's not a violence, but it's a physical action that displays his love and concern for his mentor and father figure. And then when we get to the next scene, Blade takes Whistler to his hideout, his giant industrial hideout, where he's got his gadgets and young Norman Reedus. And then you're seeing these vampires in clad black outfits. They look like ninjas with cool little red goggles. And they're just acrobatically flipping and hopping from bar to bar. And then they get over the little area where Whistler and Scud are, and they drop down. And immediately Whistler fires at them. Defensively, one of the vampires disarms Whistler and knocks him to the ground. Then Blade shows up with his sword, and the other vampire looks at him. She also has a sword and draws her sword, and they both have a moment between each other. And literally, the other vampire who took Whistler's gun is like, "Hey, stop, don't fight." And then the other vampire just immediately engages in a fight with Blade. And now this fight is a little more dance-like. It's a little more stylized. It's a little more relaxed than the other fight. And you're really just seeing kind of this dramatic sparring match between Blade and this other vampire. You can kind of tell from the shape of her body, and it's a woman. But you just don't see her face because she's still got the mask on. But it's like this very, very cool battle between the two of them. But it's a battle that ultimately ends with both of them having their swords at each other, him to her neck and her to his groin. And the battle ends with them both at a standstill, meaning that Blade has met his match. He has met his equal in battle. So when the fight stops, it stops right there because the other vampire says, stop, wait, don't kill each other. We have a message from the vampire people, and they stop, they turn the regular lights back on, and the vampire Blade was fighting pulls off her mask, and she's this beautiful woman, and Blade says nothing, but he just has this long look at her, and she kind of has a long look back at him. There's chemistry. This is something important to talk about, okay? The first scene, Blade kills people quick, efficiently, because emotionally, he does not care. He's after Whistler. But what does that also say about the movie? That the action scene itself is being dealt with from an emotional standpoint. That the way he fights has everything to do with his emotional point of view and his goal or his intention to get to someone he cares about. And then when we look at this fight, it's a completely different style of fight, where it's more of a spar, where these two are having fun. Only she is able to keep up with him in battle. And that this is where the commentary is very important, because everything that I just said is what Guillermo del Toro says in his commentary. Guillermo del Toro is the one who says, you look at the way Blade kills the vampires in the beginning, and they are doing this, and he is doing it quickly because he doesn't care. His emotion is not there. When we see the fight scene with Nisa, this is more balletic, and it's a dance. And the way Guillermo del Toro explains action movies, he says that action movies are just dance movies, except instead of dancing, they're fighting. But it's the same principle where relationships are being made or destroyed because of the action sequence or through the action sequence. Action movies, the action scenes themselves, when done properly, have everything to do with character and what they care about and how they will change. So this sparring session that ends with a stalemate is what? It's the seed of the beginning of a romantic relationship between Blade and a vampire. And why is that so important? Because we know from the first movie and the opening sequence of this movie that Blade literally could give less than a shit about a vampire. But for this one vampire woman who almost killed him, he has pause. And just like with the pause for Whistler, his pause means something. So this is just something to think about. I want you to understand that when you make an action movie, the action has everything to do with character. And Del Toro, again, one of the most successful filmmakers of our time. Not that he makes the most money. He's still always indie-minded. He always tells his own story. But he's one of those directors that you know by name or you've heard about because he understands that storytelling is an emotional experience that the audience has. That your job is, even as an action director, even though the story might not really be that deep, there should still be a story there, and that you're taking the audience on this emotional ride because later on in the movie, Blade will be looking out for Nisa.